Aduke appeared at the center of the room, covered in dirt, her school uniform torn and stained. The girls screamed and huddled together. "Please," Folake sobbed, "we're sorry." 2 months before her death, Aduke Adeleke sat in the back of the mathematics class, carefully copying notes into her worn notebook. Unlike her classmates' fancy school bags and notebooks, Aduke's school supplies came from the small stationery shop in Mushin, where her father sometimes traded. "Look at her calculator," Folake whispered loudly to Tomiwa, ensuring Aduke would hear. "It's not even a scientific one." Probably bought it at Balogun Market. Aduke gripped her pencil tighter, but kept writing. She had earned her place here. Her entrance exam scores had been the highest in Westminster Academy's history, a fact that seemed to irritate her wealthy classmates even more than her second-hand uniform. During lunch breaks, Aduke would sit alone in the library, studying while eating the jollof rice and plantain her mother packed for her. The other students preferred the cafeteria with its expensive international menu, but Aduke loved her mother's cooking. It reminded her of home, of the small but warm single room where her family lived. "You don't have to hide in here every day," Mrs. Okafor, the librarian, once told her. "You deserve to enjoy the cafeteria like everyone else." Aduke had just smiled. "I like it here, Ma. Besides, I need to maintain my scholarship. I can't let my parents down." Her parents had been so proud when she got the scholarship. Her father had saved for months to buy her the required school uniforms, even though it meant delaying repairs on his market stall. Her mother had cried tears of joy, saying, "This education will open doors that were closed to us, Aduke. You will go far." In class, Aduke excelled. Her hand would shoot up first whenever teachers asked questions. Her assignments were always perfect, and her test scores never dropped below 95%. But her academic success only seemed to fuel the hatred from Folake's group. They would pour water on her books, hide her lunchbox, and make loud comments about her cheap shoes. Once, Bisi had even tried to trip her on the stairs, but Aduke endured it all silently, focusing on her studies and her dream of becoming a doctor. The only person who showed her any kindness was Amara, the daughter of the school's chaplain who sometimes shared her lunch break in the library. But after Folake's group cornered Amara and threatened to make her life miserable if she kept talking to the charity case, even that small friendship faded. The day before everything changed, Aduke had received news that she'd been selected to represent Westminster Academy at the National Science Competition. The announcement had been made during morning assembly, and she could feel Folake's group glaring at her as she walked up to receive the nomination letter. "This is what Westminster Academy represents," the principal had said proudly. "Excellence, regardless of background." Later that day, she found her science project destroyed in the laboratory. On the remains was a note, "Know your place." That evening, as she helped her mother prepare egusi soup for dinner, Aduke had considered telling her parents about the bullying, but seeing how tired her father looked after a long day at the market, how her mother's hands were rough from cleaning houses, she couldn't bring herself to worry them more. "How was school today?" her mother had asked. "Fine, Mama, everything is fine." The next day, Folake and her friends invited Aduke to study with them after school. It was the first time they'd ever been nice to her. She had been suspicious, but also hopeful. Maybe winning the science competition had finally made them accept her. That hope died in the woods behind the school, as they pushed her into the shallow grave they'd prepared, laughing as they piled dirt on top of her screaming mouth. The dirt filled her mouth as she screamed. Aduke Adeleke clawed desperately at the earth, pressing down on her face, but the weight was too much. Above ground, she could hear their laughter fading away as her lungs burned for air. They had really done it. The mean gays from Westminster Academy had actually buried her alive. That to teach the common street rat to know her place was the last thing Aduke had before everything went black. That night, Aduke didn't come home. Her mother, Mrs. Adeleke, paced their small room continuously. "Something is wrong," she kept saying, clutching her phone. "Aduke always calls if she's going to be late." Mr. Adeleke had already walked to the school twice, finding only locked gates and a sleeping security guard. "Let's call the police," Mrs. Adeleke said, her hands shaking as she dialed. The police officer's response was casual. "Madam, calm down. These rich school children, they sometimes go to their friends' houses without telling their parents. Call back tomorrow if she hasn't returned." But Aduke's parents knew better. Their daughter never went anywhere without permission. The next morning, they were at Westminster Academy as soon as the gates opened. "We haven't seen Aduke since yesterday afternoon," the principal said, looking uncomfortable. According to her classmates, she left after classes ended. "Which classmates?" Mr. Adeleke demanded. "Who saw her last?" Folake and her friends were called to the office. They sat there in their crisp uniforms, looking concerned. "We invited her to study with us," Folake said smoothly, but she declined, said she needed to go home. Mrs. Adeleke stared at the girls. Something about their perfect posture and rehearsed answer felt wrong. Days turned into weeks. Mr. Adeleke neglected his market stall to search for his daughter. He put up posters all over Lagos, visited every police station, and begged television stations to feature Aduke's story. Mrs. Adeleke stopped going to the houses she cleaned, spending her days praying and crying instead. Their neighbors in Mushin organized search parties, but found nothing. "This rich people's school," their neighbor Mama Chidi said. "Why did you send her there? They don't like poor people's children." Detective Okonkwo was assigned to the case after local media picked up the story. He sat in the Adelike's room, taking notes. "Your daughter," he said, "did she have any enemies at school?" Mrs. Adeleke wiped her tears. "She never complained, but sometimes I saw water stains on her books. She would come home with bruises on her body," Mr. Adeleke added. "Said she fell while playing. But how can someone fall every week?" The detective interviewed students at Westminster Academy. Most avoided eye contact and gave vague answers. But Amara, the chaplain's daughter, finally broke down. "They were horrible to her," she whispered. "Folake and her friends. They called her a bush girl, destroyed her things. But please don't tell them I told you. My father needs this job." Detective Okonkwo tried to question Folake's group again, but their parents sent expensive lawyers instead. "My clients have no information about the missing student," one lawyer said, "and we would appreciate you stopping this harassment." 3 weeks after Aduke's disappearance, strange things started happening at Westminster Academy. It began with Folake's encounter in the bathroom. Folake Balogun stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of Westminster Academy's East Wing. Her perfectly styled braids and neat uniform couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept properly since that night. "Get it together," she whispered to herself. She was nobody, just some poor girl from Mushin who didn't belong here. The bathroom lights flickered. Folake froze. A cold draft brushed against her neck, making her shiver despite the warm September morning. In the mirror, she saw a dark figure standing behind her. She spun around. The bathroom was empty. "Hello?" Her voice echoed off the tiled walls. No response. When she turned back to the mirror, her blood ran cold. Written in what looked like red nail polish across the glass were 2 words. I'm back. Folake's scream echoed through the halls of Westminster Academy. Did you see Folake at lunch? Yewande whispered to Tomiwa as they walked to chemistry class. She looks terrible. Tomiwa adjusted her school bag on her shoulder. She's being dramatic. We all agreed never to talk about what happened to that scholarship girl. The police ruled it as a runaway case. But what if? Don't. Tomiwa cut her off sharply. Her father was just a small-time trader at Balogun Market. Everyone bought that she ran away from the pressure of not fitting in. End of story. They entered the chemistry class and took their usual seats at the back. On their bench, written in red nail polish, were the words, "You buried me." But the truth won't stay buried. That evening, 5 girls gathered in Folake's family mansion in Banana Island. They were the elite of Westminster Academy. Folake Balogun, Tomiwa Adebayo, Yewande Ogunlesi, Bisi Oladipo, and Aisha Babangida. Now they sat in fearful silence, their usual confidence shattered. Someone knows, Bisi said. Someone knows what we did to Aduke. That's impossible, Aisha snapped, but her hands were shaking. We were the only ones there that night. Folake paced the room. We have to stay calm. There's no proof. It was just some stupid pranks today. Pranks? Yewande's voice cracked. The writing, it's her. Somehow it's her. She's dead, Tomiwa shouted, then immediately lowered her voice. We made sure of that. Suddenly, the lights in Folake's room began to flicker. The temperature dropped so suddenly they could see their breath. No, 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 Bisi whimpered. The television turned on by itself. Through the white noise, they heard a familiar voice, a voice that had begged them for mercy that night in the woods. Aduke appeared at the center of the room, covered in dirt, her school uniform torn and stained. The girls screamed and huddled together. Please, Folake sobbed. We're sorry. Aduke's ghost moved closer. Sorry isn't enough. You buried me alive because I was poor, because I was different, because my father was a market trader while yours owned the whole market. We'll confess, Yewande cried. We'll tell everyone what we did. Yes, Aduke's spirit said, her voice echoing unnaturally. You will. The next morning, Westminster Academy was swarming with police cars and news vans. 5 of the school's most prominent students had walked into the police station at dawn. When the girls confessed, they broke down completely. We didn't mean to kill her, Folake sobbed at the police station. We just wanted to scare her, but she struggled so much, and the dirt, we kept throwing it. The police found Aduke's body exactly where they said it would be. Mrs. Adeleke collapsed when they brought her daughter's body home. The entire street in Mushin came out for the funeral. Market women closed their stores. The trial was swift. Despite their parents' money and influence, all 5 girls were sentenced to juvenile detention. Their families offered the Adelekes millions in compensation. Keep your money, Mr. Adeleke said, his voice firm. Can your millions bring back my daughter? Can they give her the future she dreamed of? Westminster Academy established the Aduke Adeleke Foundation, providing full scholarships to underprivileged students. But more importantly, they implemented strict anti-bullying measures. In juvenile detention, the girls served their sentences. They were haunted not just by Aduke's ghost, but by the reality of what they had done. Their wealthy parents couldn't protect them from the guilt that ate at their souls. 1 week later, Mrs. Okafor the librarian was closing up when she saw Aduke in the library. The ghost was sitting at her usual spot, books spread out before her. a peaceful smile on her face. "Rest well, dear one," Mrs. Okafor whispered.